Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so today we're covering BRBC, TDS, SPQ, and our Avid. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know, give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Everyone can hear me and see me, correct? Okay, perfect. All
Yes.
right. So, BRBC, what I'm going to do today, it'll be a little bit different than what we've done in the past. I'm going to fill out the BRBC and use it as a template. And so I know that a lot of you will have follow-up questions regarding BRBC and what is standard. So we're going to do this together. I'm going to fill it out so you can reference back to it kind of as a template. If you send me an email, I'm going to see if our chat is enabled in this one. Let me see if I can send it to you. If you can email me, and then I'll respond back and I'll send all of the templates from our class today for you. So, um, I don't know if I can chat. I'll figure it out. But what we'll do is all of these will be a template. They'll be available to you. Send me an email, and then I'll respond back with all of these forms filled out. That way you can reference back to them. So, all right, we'll go ahead and get started. So the first form we are going to fill out today is the BRBC. Um, Click here, date prepared. That gets left out pretty often, but be sure that you have the date that it is prepared there. Um, Buyer's name, say Mr. Buyer today. Okay, representation period. Now, the standard or normal period that we're seeing is anywhere between 3 to 6 months. Now, it can be a shorter period, just depending on what you and the buyer agree to. We can start the agreement as of today, um, and then we can go, let's do till August 18th. Okay, so that is our representation period. Type of representation. If it's non-exclusive, that means that this agent, or excuse me, this buyer is also working with other agents. And so it's a non-exclusive agreement. If you find them a property, then great, you are entitled to the compensation. However, they can also work with additional agents and have multiple representation agreements that are maybe non-exclusive. So if they if there's a particular neighborhood that they're looking with this particular agent, then they could potentially have a non-exclusive. And they might want you for a non-exclusive. So this one, typically what we're doing is exclusive is standard. And so that is when you have a buyer lead, maybe a referral, somebody from your sphere of influence, and they want you to represent them and be their agent. And so you're the exclusive agent. They're not working with other agents. And this is a contract that you find them a property, you're entitled to commission. And they cannot work with other agents. And I'll get down here in a little bit where there's a question where they have to fill out if they're asking or if they're currently working with other additional agents. Um, okay, property type. Single family residence mostly is what we're looking at. If it were an investor, if they're looking at multifamily, industrial, vacant land, commercial, tenancy in common, where they're just purchasing interest in a property. Maybe it's a larger building, and then there's a portion of that that's for sale, not the actual property itself, but ownership interest in that property is tenants in common. Or if it's only a certain property. So if they just want you to show, if maybe you're the listing agent and they say, look, I just want to take a look at this one property you're listing, or if there's a couple properties they want to show you, you can click here and you list the actual property addresses here. That's where you would specify if it's just more of a limited one. But for the sake of this template, we are going to leave it as clean as possible and as standard as possible. So single family residence. And that includes condos or manufactured homes. So single family, um, If it's excluded, include single family residence, including condos and manufactured homes. So that's everything included. So if you're out looking at houses and they want to look at a condo or a manufactured home, you don't have to do an additional BRBC if you didn't have it marked here. Okay. Location. I like to go broad and I just put county, Sacramento County. If there's additional county close by, maybe they're looking in, maybe Galt to cover San Joaquin County, then you could put, and you're, kind of, it's teetering on that county line, then you can put San Joaquin County as well. So you can go wider out. Now, if you have, if this particular buyer could potentially be looking in the Bay Area as well. So maybe they're looking from, maybe they live in the Bay Area and they might be commuting, and so they're kind of in the in between. We've run into this recently where there was an agent who had referred it out to somebody in a different area. The buyer wanted to come back to that particular area. And so I said, okay, well, what does it say on their BRBC? Where is it located? Because they can work with additional agent outside a different area. They can have multiple buyers representation agreements if they're a different area. So it has to specify where they're looking at. So we can put here, I like to go broad again, Sacramento, San Joaquin County, if that's, what the area they have identified. So we'll just leave that in here, countywide. If there were any additional descriptions or anything that you want to limit it to, you can add that there. Pretty standard that you leave it broad and then you go in from there, unless it's a particular type of buyer that only wants specific things and it's not as an exclusive type relationship and it's very limited, would be where you would need additional items added in here. Okay. And then again, getting into number C, or letter C, excuse me, that's buyer preference and priority. So if they had very, very specific, then it would be included there. But again, that's not really standard. We typically just do a blanket BRBC to find the person, the property. If there are any properties excluded for the representation. So maybe they were working with a different agent and they showed them a couple properties. Maybe they wrote an offer on a property and the offer didn't get accepted. And they said, you know what? They sent a cancellation to that previous agent, and now they want to work with you. Well, what they would need to do is exclude properties where there was another agent that would be the procuring cause of the sale. So if the property that they looked at with that other agent came back on the market, then we're going to have a compensation issue here because the other agent is potentially owed compensation. So you would add in here, or would have the client add in here, if there were any additional properties that maybe they were in contract in before, interested in, or somebody else showed them the property. So it's not so much as an agent, I don't want to say it's not our issue because it still very much is, but it is the buyer contracted with a previous agent. They're in contract. So if they don't notify that agent and if they breach that contract and then we show them, maybe they have an exclusive with somebody else, they don't tell us, they don't notify you as the agent, and then you show properties and you go in a contract and you're owed commission, well, you're still getting compensated that commission. So it's not that it's not our problem, but really it's the buyer's going to owe two commission. So that's really effectively what the issue is. Buyer has two contracts. They've agreed to somebody else. Hey, yes, you are exclusively representing me. If I find a house, you're owed commission. And then they're signing a contract now with you as the second agent saying the same thing. So it's going to be an issue with the buyer. They're putting themselves at risk. So we're still getting compensated, but the buyer's, effectively putting themselves at risk because they're contractually obligated to two parties. And so you do want to have the buyer, ask them, were you working with somebody? Did you sign something? Buyers sometimes say, I don't know, I don't remember. Well, double check your email, make sure you didn't sign another agreement because you could be on the hook for two commissions, and we don't want to see that happen, that you have to pay two people. So let's get that sorted out from the start before you go into contract with somebody else. So it's not something we want to ignore. Again, it's not that it's not our problem, but we want to make sure that we are going into contract with somebody who's not in contract with another person or another party. So we would exclude if there were any property, having that conversation, if there were any properties that need to be excluded, you would add there. amount of compensation. So this is, an agreement between you and the buyer. You can have that discussion and ask them if they do have the funds to compensate you, explain how you're compensated so you can offer it. But typically we ask for it in the offer. However, if the seller does not compensate us, do you have the funds to pay? Because we're owed this. So we have been seeing that the sellers are agreeable to pay a portion of the buyer's agent compensation um, because that's, we work it into the agreement and into the contract. So we can put a higher amount here. So on the higher side is 3%. Because if you put 2% or 2.5%, I mean, again, that is going to be determined when you write the residential purchase agreement. When you write the offer and submit the offer, that amount of compensation you'll discuss with the buyer at that time, the listing agent, and when you're drafting and all of the terms of the agreement. However, I recommend to put a higher amount because if in your conversations you're discussing with the listing agent, they say, look, if you bring me the seller has indicated if you bring a full price offer, a shorter close, they're going to give a bonus of, $5,000 bonus to the first buyer's agent. Great. But that would limit you if you have a smaller amount in here. And so any amount, you can't be compensated. So it's always easier to go higher and then do a modification of terms and then modify your commission down to the lower amount afterwards, depending on what you negotiate in the residential purchase agreement with that seller. So you can leave that in here. Um, let's see. Payments received by broker from seller or others. If broker received compensation from seller or others for broker's representation of buyer, the amount shall be credited against buyer's obligation to pay broker. Broker shall not receive any amount in excess of the amount specified in this paragraph. And so what that means is if they are offering an additional amount and this amount is lower, that you will not receive any amount in excess of the amount specified here. And so again, if there's a bonus being offered or something like that, you can't get the over amount. You can always go lower. You can always reduce your commission. If they're only offering you 2% commission, if you draft up the offer, they send a counter back and they're saying we're capped out at 2%, then you just do a modification of terms. If they would have paid more, you can't go higher. You can only go lower. Okay, let's see. Continued right to payment for broker involved properties. If there's a continuation period, you can ask that. So if this agreement is not canceled, the end of representation period or any extension thereof, this agreement, the effective date of cancellation is specified in paragraph 2F. So you can add a continuation date after your cancellation. So I recommend 30 days afterwards. So if you're out showing properties to this client and you've shown them a couple properties and you think maybe they're kind of trying to work directly with the seller, this 30 days will protect you. The continuation period here will kind of add that extra layer of protection. Broker is paying a referral fee. So if you were referred this buyer from somebody, then click here and it will automatically attach the realtor agreement. That'll be automatically attached here. So we definitely need that filled out if there is a referral being paid. So that is a new form that is required. Okay, cancellation rights. Cancellation is effective upon receipt or the continuation period. You can do 30 days after the receipt, or you don't have to do any additional amount here. So we'll just leave it in 30 days here. Oh, excuse me, sorry. We're doing exclusive, so I'm gonna take this out here. 30 days. Okay, let's see here. Okay, do we have any questions on this first page here?
No.
Okay, all right, moving right along. Oh, I do have the chat here. All right, I'm going to drop my email address if you logged in after. I'm doing all of the forms as a template that you can use and you can refer back to. Um, so if you, I'll send my email here now. If you send me an email, I'll respond back to that email with the forms. And so you have to shoot me an email and then I'm going to respond back. And so you just put in the subject line, broker compliance, request for forms, and I'll send it back to you. Okay. Let's see. All right. Covered everything there. Let's see. Compensation. I think I covered everything that I want to cover here. Okay. All right. And then the buyer signs it here at the bottom. And then, of course, we fill out all of our oh, didn't pop up. We'd fill out all of our, let me do this. Okay. Finish filling that out over here. All right. Any questions on the BRBC before we move over to some of these other disclosures, the TDS and SPQ? All right. TDS. All right. Our transfer disclosure statement. Now, these are read out. That way you cannot see it says editable only by seller one. So we can't fill out the forms, only the seller can, but nonetheless, we're going to go over what these mean and what your seller should or shouldn't disclose and assisting them kind of somewhat filling this out. And so this form is very important. So the main forms, if something goes wrong in the transaction, it's the TDS, the SPQ, and the AVID that we look at. The reason we look at those forms is they're the only forms where the seller and agent actually fill out their own information, and they are not the template forms. They're not the just the pre-filled forms disclosing. So these are actually forms that the seller is filling out themselves, writing things in, making notes, and verifying personally things about the property. And so that's why these forms are the most important forms in any transaction, because they're telling you what the deal is with the property. And so seller is or is not occupying the property. They would fill it out here. And when we're reviewing these, when we have the listing, first of all, when you take a listing, I highly recommend getting the disclosures sent out as soon as possible. As soon as you take the listing, send out the disclosures at minimum, the TDS and the SPQ. That way you have that information about the property. Once you get an offer, you can send it very quickly over to the new buyer. That way they're reviewing everything about the property. It saves a lot of time and, maybe some potential issues in the future if they see something and have questions regarding an issue on the TDS or SPQ. Okay, so they would fill out all this information. If your clients, they don't know, they're not contractors, so sometimes they don't know what some of the terms are. And so if they are on public, they have a property built in a subdivision and that says they click septic tank or sep pump, and that they're not, you can advise them and say, hey, we're going to have to change this because we know it's not on sep pump, right? But what we don't want to do is fill it out for the client. We don't want to fill it out for them and tell them everything about the property because we don't know, right? But we just review it and have them fill it out and review. And just if it's something obvious that we know that they don't have, if they say that they have, if they're on bottle tank and they're not, they don't have a propane tank, they're just a normal property on city, then you would have them amend that. Or, the reverse, if they're out in the country and they say that it's on public and public is city, and you know that it's not, you can have them make those changes and advise them to change that, because what we don't want to do is have them fill out the TDS accidentally incorrect, and then we send it over to the buyer, and the buyer says, great, it's on city, and we close escrow, and it is not on city. And then they refer back to the TDS and they say, well, client said that it's on city. And the client's like, well, I never said that. I didn't know. And it goes back to the agent. And so we just want to double check to make sure that, the information is accurate. This is important. Are you, the seller, aware of any significant defects, malfunctions in any of the following? Yes or no. So you could mark, if the client says no, but you know that there's some items, you could let them know, hey, do you remember, you said you had an insurance claim because there was a pipe burst, or you had, a roof leak. And so you can advise them to amend this and make changes. Okay. And then here are some real quick yes or no to fill out here. I think the biggest one that we see is when we know there is CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions in a neighborhood, and they mark no. So that's probably the biggest oops that we see, because they're like, no, I don't know what that is, so I'm just going to mark no. But a lot of times there are CC&Rs, which you don't really know sometimes unless you see the preliminary title report. Or unless you know in advance that there are these certain covenants, conditions, and restrictions. So covenants, for those of you who don't know what CC&Rs are, they're very similar to like homeowners association, but there's usually not dues or fees associated with it. So CC&Rs can say, so when a subdivision is built, CC&Rs can say all houses need to be painted in the following colors, right? So you can't, maybe they'll exclude the color yellow, or you can't paint your house red, right? So it has to be a neutral color. Or they can say no parking of boats or motorhomes on the street. So those restrictions, they're not that you have, there's not an association or a homeowners association or dues that are overlooking this. However, they are these restrictions that keep the neighborhood kind of looking in more of a uniform, a more uniform. So that's what they are, CC&Rs. Common area interest, any lawsuits or notices or citations against the property. They had if maybe it's an investment property and they had, or a tenant occupied, and there's some abatement things because the lawn's long or something like that, or they have, a broke down car outside, or citations, you could mark that. Okay. And if there's answer yes to any of these, they can fill out the information here. It's always better to disclose than to not disclose. So if there's something that they think potentially could be an issue, it's always better to address it, but we don't want to, raise questions where there aren't a problem. So it's that fine line. We definitely want to make sure that if there's anything that the client thinks could potentially be an issue, we're not supposed to identify what could be potentially material. So just everything about the property they have to disclose, but they don't have to step over and do further investigations on the property to see this could be an issue. If you don't know, just disclose to the best of your knowledge, but it's not really also in the scope of what the seller needs to do to look for more information and potential issues. And so we just wanted to verify this after they fill it out. Be sure to look, verify the information on the form. Okay. Any questions on TDS? Okay. All right. Moving right along. Now, this one is the SPQ. This one is a lot more thorough because there's actual spots here for everything to be filled out if there was information here. So I get this question often. So Reports, inspection, disclosures, warranties, maintenance, recommendation, estimates, studies, surveys, or other documents, whether prepared in the past or present, including any previous transaction and whether or not seller acted upon the item pertaining to the condition or repair of the property or any improvement on this property in the past, now or proposed, easements, encroachments, boundaries, disputes affecting the property, whether oral in writing, and whether or not provided to the seller. So this question comes up often. You list a house, or excuse me, you represent the buyer, they buy the house, and then 2 years later they go to sell the house. If you have anything on that property, anything before, any inspections, disclosures, anything done, you have to provide it to the new buyer. So it's saying right here, if there's anything here, you need to provide it. So um right here it says let's see. Okay, seller awareness. For each statement below, answer the question, are you aware of, and either by checking yes or no, and mark yes or no. A yes, your answer is appropriate no matter how long ago the item being asked about happened or if it was documented unless otherwise specified. So just, again, advising them to just say yes. It's always easier to say yes, because if it comes back and they say, you didn't tell me about this, and you go back to refer back to the SBQ and say, yes, we did. We talked about it and it was disclosed to you. Okay, so then you can put here in the explanation, if there was anything here, you can mark property was purchased in 2024 and attached is home inspection from, previous home inspection. So you can add that in here. Let's see. Oh, the statutory or contractually required or related. Are you aware of any of the items here? Yes or no. Material facts or defects affecting the property not otherwise disclosed to the buyer. Yes or no. This is any of the miscellaneous things. Anything about the property that can't potentially be covered in here, you could mark yes or no. This could potentially be if there were maybe a death in the property 5 years ago, and maybe it was a murder, right? It wasn't 3 years ago because you have to disclose if something happened, if there was a death in the property in the past 3 years. However, you don't have to disclose if it was before that. Now, if it was somebody who, died in their sleep, maybe you think, okay, well, we don't have to disclose that because it specifically says 3 years, but maybe if it were something that they could see on the news or reading a newspaper article, that could potentially be a material fact. So something like that, they would add in here. Repairs and alterations. We see this a lot where the seller does a bunch of updates and then we put in MLS and we advertise it that, there's a new bathroom and a new kitchen and these new things that were put in. And then and then here we look at the SPQ and then there's nothing in here. No modification or repairs. So I've seen this, I've caught this on both ends of it, but I've seen it as, representing the buyer. It's advertised in MLS and I'm like, okay, well, it says there were no, you just a full remodel, but then it says here that there were no alterations, modifications, replacements, improvements. Which one is it? Because you're saying two different things here. And so we usually have them have to go back and amend the SPQ to say, hey, yes, we did do modifications and we want to know what was done. And so this is holding the seller, especially if it's investor or a flip property, where they say, yes, it was done. Okay, well, tell us what was done. That way we can notify the client. The paint too, sometimes they don't say if it was painted within the past 12 months, and then we clearly can see that it was. Okay, structural systems appliances, if there's any issues here, this is kind of a big one. And when you get these as the buyer's agent, you can go through and look, and it's a real quick yes or no. If you're looking down, no, no, no. Oh, you see a yes. Okay, what's going on here? And then you could see, the potential issue here. Okay, water-related mold issues, pets, animals, pests. Yes, they can put if there was a dog or a cat living in the property. boundary access and property, use by others, encroachments or any disputes or anything like that. You can mark here. Landscaping and pool, if there were sprinklers on the property, pool, is it heated, operational, any past or present defects, leaks, cracks, repairs, or any other problems here, they would mark there. Condo, now we've had recently the issue with SB 326, and it is regarding the HOA requirement for the wood balconies. And so what we can do here, if the HOA has elected not to do that and not to comply, so the date to comply and have the inspections done and have the work done was 2025. Now, if the HOA, they're using a kind of a loophole to kind of get out of this inspection because it is very costly, it is not a seller specific requirement. Okay. So you can put here, you can have the client put here that HOA has elected not to participate in the SB 326 because it is a HOA specific statute. It is not a homeowner statute. Homeowners don't have to comply. Associations have to comply. So if the association elects not to, it doesn't fall back onto the homeowner. And so you can add that in there if you run into that issue. If you run into the issue, call me and I can walk you through that. Title ownership, liens, and legal claims. If there was anything, any issues, right? If it's probate, if it wasn't a trust and taken out of a trust, if there's any, potential issues here, that would be disclosed here, or you can disclose here. Have your client disclose and use a listing agent review. Neighborhoods, if there's any nuisance issues here. Okay, and the material facts at the bottom. If there's anything additional that they need to disclose, then you can mark here. Have them mark there. All right. Do we have any questions on SPQ? Okay, moving right along. So our last one is our AVID. Now this one is the form that we fill out. So for the AVID, this is our visual inspection. We see property, we look at the property and we see what we can visualize. So our scope of duty does not include the roof. We do not have to climb on the roof. If we see that tiles are missing on the roof, if we see that there are, issues potentially with the roof, then that can be noted. However, we don't have to climb on the roof and it's not advised. Same thing with going in the attic. You don't have to go into the attic. You don't have to crawl underneath the property. Now, if you can look underneath the property and see if there is, an issue, something that's visible, then yes. So anything that's visible, we're responsible for disclosing. Anything that's not actually visible, we don't have to move things. That's not within the scope of what our duty is. It is just looking at the property, certifying, yes, that we did go into the property. And so it goes into detail here. We don't operate appliances, so don't run the dishwasher, go underneath. It always is a little helpful. You check lights when you're showing the property, and if there's not, say, hey, the lights aren't on, or can you make sure that the power's on before we do our inspections and things like that. But it is not within the scope of our duty to do things like that. Yeah, mold, asbestos. We don't check for things like that. What we would do is, if you see something that potentially looks like mold, or you have an odor or smell, then you can get supplemental reports, and you can, when you're home, you can tell your buyer, hey, let's get a home inspection and have them check this out, and then potentially get other additional reports to have these items checked out. And so that's really what our duty is. Our duty is to advise and on experts to get their information, contractors, inspectors that specialize in each particular area, and not have to do it, ourselves because we could be misadvising. We don't know, and we don't have that specialized duty, and we're not acting in that capacity. And if you do, then it opens you up to liability. Because you could say, yeah, that's definitely mold. Well, how do you know? Are you an expert? And then now you go into that murky area of liability. So it's always very difficult with agents because we want to be helpful. And that usually is when agents get into trouble, is kind of going outside of what the scope of their duty is. Okay, so entry. Clear. Nothing to note. This is the easiest way. This is what I like to do. Living room. Clear. Nothing to note. Okay. Dining room. Okay. You can add something in here. Kitchen. Let's see. Clear. Dishwasher. Microwave. Stove. In place. Nothing to note. So you could write something like that, just that all the appliances are in place. So, kind of naming off what appliances are there. You don't want to use adjectives. You don't want to say, it is, very clean, or there's a large crack. So any words like that, you don't want to use. It's what you observed. It's just facts without using adjectives. You do want to fill out every particular area that you go to. So if there are 3 bedrooms, we need each bedroom filled out. Okay. Same thing with bathrooms. If there are 2 or 3 bathrooms, you need them listed. If there are 4 bathrooms and you only have 1 and 2, this makes it assuming that you didn't view the other 2. And so whatever there is, you need to have it filled out. So just put, let's put den. Bedroom 1, fan. See, there's a fan and nothing to note. And I also like to do this. Front bedroom here too. Facing bedroom. Okay. And let's see. File. Let's see. White. So you can add things in here. So if you walk into the primary bedroom and there's a tile floor and maybe it's cracked and there's some large cracks, you can put with cracks and say there's no light. There's supposed to be a light fixture and it's clearly missing. You can put missing light. Bath, you could put, let's see, hall bathroom. Stains on ceiling. Chips in bathtub. Okay, so you can note things that you see here. If there's nothing to note, if you walk into a bedroom and there's a fan there and it's completely cleared out, clear, nothing to note. Okay. anything else that you see, hall bathroom, there's stains on the ceiling, there's chips in the bathtub, you can note those things here as well. Okay. And then I like to do, if there's any other particular areas, you can mark here. If there was an additional room or structure, say there's an ADU or something attached to the back, then you can add that here. Garage or parking, put water heater in garage. Yes. And if there were any other no conditions not specified above, you can mark that here. So I like to do this when I do my, as a buyer's agent, I like to do my Avid when I do the home inspection. So I have the home inspector at the property. I go out, let them into the property, and then I like to do my Avid. And so you can, find your own, way of doing it or whatever you feel comfortable with, but I like to do it at that time and be out there at the property. If you, it's clear and sunny. Okay, and that's how we fill out the Avid. Do we have any questions about our Avid? Okay. Okay, so we went over TDS, SBQ, Avid, and BRBC. We have a little bit of time left. Does anybody have any questions regarding any of the other forms that we went over today? We have to take a couple minutes and do a quick review if you guys want to.
No, thank you. Everything was fine.
Okay, perfect. Again, I dropped
Thanks.
my,
Feels
yeah,
good.
thank you. I dropped my email in the chat. Shoot me an email. I'll respond back with all of these forms and you can use them as a template. So, all right, you guys have a good day. Let me know if you have any other
You
questions.
too.
Email. Okay. All right. Have a good day.